Hi, everyone. This is Michael Rubino here with another episode of Mold Talks. Today, I have a very special guest. His name is Michael. Michael, introduce yourself. Let everyone know why you're here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michael, and today I'm here to share my mold story.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that. I'm highly interested in this, mainly because I don't know if you've kind of picked up on this yourself in watching some of the podcasts, but a lot of people that come on here are women. So it's nice to get a different perspective from a man, mainly because I think a lot of people think that this only impacts women. So it's really important to kind of shed some light on that topic. So, let's start with your journey. I mean, when did you first start to feel unwell?
Well, I'd have to go back to April of 2018. My fiance at the time, we had bought a house, and this particular house, not to try to get too far ahead of myself, it was one of those flips. So it was an older home. Whoever bought it sent in a contractor. I guess they did a lot of repairs that weren't done correctly. A lot of the materials used in this house were basic sheetrock. It didn't have hardwood floors. It had, like the vinyl flooring that actually had like cardboard underneath, which we didn't know it at the time. And of course, the central air system. So in April, I'd say within 3 weeks after moving in, I started to get some unusual symptoms. I noticed I was shaving one day and I would see bald spots on my beard. So I went to the doctor. It was determined I had the autoimmune condition called alopecia areata. That affects people differently. Some people might get only a couple bald spots that will go away. Other people, I think Jada Pickett Smith, actually, a more recent example, they'll lose all their hair on their head. Other people will lose their eyebrows, their eyelashes, body hair, everything. And they could be like that for the rest of their life. Some people might have a spontaneous recovery. Nobody really knows what causes it. So when I was at the doctor, they tried to tell me that it was stress related because they believe autoimmunity is triggered by stress. That's just their standard textbook explanation, even though there's no data to back it up. And the treatment at the time is they would give you these steroid injections. So they just try to calm down the immune system from attacking itself by injecting a steroid into it. So I also noticed around the same time, I was getting other weird symptoms. It took me a while to narrow it down, but it was predominantly when I was in the house. I was getting burning sensations in my hands. My heartbeat would be rapid. At times I was even having difficulty breathing. And so I would go to other doctors to try to explain this. And the only thing that they could come up with is that I was stressing out over the alopecia diagnosis and I was bringing all these other symptoms upon myself. Because they gave me blood work, all the other standard tests, everything was coming out okay. So within the next couple months, I'd say from April to June, these particular symptoms would gradually worsen. The alopecia would get really bad. At this point, with only 3 months, I had several spots on my beard, and they were getting bigger. They weren't responding to the traditional treatment. I was also losing weight, muscle tone. And, but I kept on thinking, I didn't think this was just some type of spontaneous occurrence. I believe that there was, and especially the fact that it was only 3 weeks after moving into the house that I'm suddenly having these symptoms. I believe there was some type of factor that's being missed by the medical community. So all of my free time, I was on Google. I was Googling things like how the air can kill you, how the environment can kill you, how your house could kill you. And when I was Googling about how your house could kill you, I actually came up upon a couple things. One was carbon monoxide. Another thing was radon from the basement. And I came across mold. And there wasn't any article directly connecting mold exposure to alopecia areata, but there was a couple of, hypotheses about how mold can trigger an autoimmune condition if you're pre-genetically disposed to it. And I said to myself, that makes sense because at the time I had a home gym in the basement and I had been working out in the basement and there was a leak from the first floor into the basement. And there was an area of sheetrock that you couldn't see, but the water had been dripping down into that. I'm thinking, all right, it smells musty down there. So I looked up, I had a a mold inspector come. And it was traditional mold inspection. They just did the air samples and visual inspecting. But with the air samples, they found, so they told me with the particle counter, I guess they said around if the count is higher inside than outside, most likely you have a problem. And in this case, in the basement, we had a 2,500 penicillin count compared to only like a couple hundred penicillin count outside. So when they went down to do the inspection, they found that area sheetrock. They cut it out. They brought in some air scrubbers. I think I had SevPro come in and do the remediation. They ran the air scrubbers a couple of days. They took out the moldy sheetrock, and they told me, all right, everything's supposed to be fine from now on. And for maybe a little bit, I was starting to feel better. But at this point, also, it had gotten so bad on the beard, I had a clean shave about twice a day. Most of the beard was gone. The goatee wasn't connecting anymore. The sideburns were gone. So let's fast forward to, all right, so that was June where I had that first remediation. So I'm feeling better for a little bit. Here comes July. My symptoms are starting to come back. Now I'm getting those same bald spots in the back of my head. I'm going back to the doctor and they're telling me, all right, well, it's been several months. You haven't responded to treatment. I hate to tell you this, but you're probably going to be one of those people that loses everything. The eyebrows, eyelashes, it's just what we've seen. The people that don't recover from this right away are most likely going to lose everything. And that's the direction I was heading in, along with all the other symptoms. So it was not a fun time, especially that summer. My family did not believe the theory about mold causing it. The primary doctor just yelled at me and told me I wasn't managing my stress. And that led to a big argument. I walked out of the room. But I kept on thinking that, it just doesn't make sense, because we had taken a trip for that summer for a few days, and during the trip I felt fine. All the the hair didn't grow back, but all the other symptoms like the burning and all the things would go away within a day of being away from the house. So when I came back, I'm thinking, all right, there's got to be something I'm missing. So I talked to my original home inspector, and he felt really bad that he had missed the mold before we even bought the house. So he came back and he checked out the place for free. And he went into the crawl space area. The crawl space was directly underneath the kitchen. It was an exposed dirt crawl space. Apparently what had happened was the dishwasher was leaking and wasn't put in right. And not only was it leaking into the crawl space where there was insulation, it was also, the water was getting absorbed by the vinyl flooring. So it went from all the way from the kitchen into the living room. So I'd say maybe about 20 feet. The day that he found that, I called my wife. I'm like, I'm leaving the house. I'm not coming back in here. So we made arrangements to stay at her mom's house. We brought back the inspector again. They did another air test. This particular leak was probably occurring while the first leak was being taken care of. So when they did the next air sampling test, the air test in the basement came out to 97,000 penicillin count.
Wow.
And it wasn't like you could just stay out of the basement to be safe. The first floor had 55,000 count. The bedroom by itself had a 6,000 count. So wherever you were in the house, you were being exposed to it. And I think really that genetic factor plays a big role, because this entire time my wife didn't even sneeze. So it was all me. So we left that house. We got it fixed. We put it up for sale. While we're doing all that, I was staying at my mother-in-law's. And within 6 months of no improvement, within 2 months, the hair in the back of my head where the spots were grew back within 2 months. My beard, which had been mostly gone at that point, it wasn't completely recovered, but it grew in enough where I could go a day or two without shaving and nobody would know I had a problem. So I figured this whole thing was a 1 in a million occurrence. So I just wanted to get rid of the house. I figured we'd just get another apartment, counter our losses. So I left that house in September, and I stayed out of that house from September till November. And in that 2 month period, it was like I had a second chance at life. That was better. We got an apartment the end of that November. And when that next day, I knew I had a problem again, because when I woke up, I was getting the same symptoms in this apartment that I was getting in the first house. So initially, I just thought I was just going crazy. I went through a little bit of trauma with that. Let's just see how it works out. So November to January, same thing reoccurring. I convinced the landlord to have an inspection. They found mold, but the landlord was under no legal obligation to really do anything about it. He went down there with, somebody that didn't look qualified. They just cut out some of the sheetrock, and that was the end of it. There was no air scrubbing. There was no, wipe downs of any of the materials, and he wouldn't take care of it. He figured legally he did everything he was supposed to do, but that did not improve the air quality of the house. So once again, within a matter of a few months, I had to leave. And at this point, I had really studied the reports of the previous inspections. I had looked up air particle counters, and I had gotten my own. And this one might not be as good as the ones that the inspectors have, but it got me out of a lot of trouble. So, and you could get one of these at my mold detective, I believe. So I had tested that apartment. It came back with results, very high penicillin, even a Stachybotrys count. I tried to go to my parents' house. I was having problems there. I tested their place out. It was same thing. Just it failed the air inspection. So just to prove, I couldn't go back to my mother-in-law's at this point because the room was being used by one of my wife's sisters. But just to try to prove my theory, I went and tested her place out, and that's where I had recovered. And hers, it was a very, very low penicillin count. It was less than outside. So just going by the air test alone, that proved my theory. So what I did for the next couple of months, I just called a couple of friends. They said, all right, they would let me come and, I could bring my machine to their house, test it out, and said if everything looks good, I would stay there. Well, I figured out where I was going to move next. And so I found one friend, he had a spare room. So I tested his place out. Everything was good. I stayed there for a couple of months. And, once again, I recovered. All the hair that I had lost again grew back. All the symptoms from the burning sensations and the rapid heartbeat would go away. Those symptoms would go away almost immediately within a day. But the hair, as far as all the hair I would lose, that would take several weeks or months of continued basically having to not being exposed for that duration of time for that to start to regrow. And this was a very difficult time because, I'm supposed to be getting married in a couple of months, and we can't figure out our living situation. As you can imagine, it caused a lot of stress on the relationship. But, luckily we got through this part. We started looking at more apartments, and this time I brought my machine with me, tested everything, found an apartment that had passing air quality standards. We moved in there, and I'd say for a good 6 months in there, from like April of 2019 to October of 2019, things were pretty good. I was once in a while in that apartment, I was getting some of the symptoms here and there, but they would go away. I would get a occasional bald spot on my beard or whatever, would go away. I'm like, all right, I can live with this for now. So for that 6 months, things were good. We got married. Everything went fine with planning. Things are starting to go back to normal. But then October of that year, we started using the heat, the central air system. All of a sudden now my symptoms are coming back pretty bad. So had the place tested, found a problem with central air and another problem underfloor. So I realized at this point, what I did by selling the house the first time was the wrong move, because when I owned the house, I had control. If I needed, I could take down any wall I needed to take down at that point. It was up to me. When you live in an apartment, you're at the mercy of what the landlord wants you to do, because there's no, I guess, when it comes to health inspections or property inspections, they don't do any type of mold test. If they can't see it, it's not considered a problem. They don't care about the air quality or, anything else beyond what's necessary.
Okay,
so
yeah.
May of 2020. So I had to repeat once again. I left. I stayed in a hotel or a friend's house. Symptoms would go away. Hair would grow back once again. We got another place in May, and this time this gets even more. I'd say the plot twists a little bit, because I had a mold inspection. Air quality came back good. I move in this place, and I'm wondering, why am I having problems? And that's when I started to realize that air sampling by itself is not enough to really tell you the extent of if you have a mold problem or not. I might give you a basic idea if it's somewhat good for that particular day, but that's about it. And that's when I learned about other tests. I learned about mycotoxin tests. I learned about ERMI sampling, the dust sampling. And I had gotten a different inspector at this point, a guy named Steve Levy. He did a great inspection of the house and all these tests. And when we took that ERMI sampling, I think it initially was a positive 18, which is very high. So gradually, we would renovate the house. I had to do everything in this house. The roof had been had 2 layers. All the moisture was trapped in between 2 layers, so I had to completely redo the roof. The siding of this house, I thought it was aluminum siding, and what I guess the previous owners did, they put aluminum siding up over wooden shingle siding. So when we took the siding off and we took the wooden shingle siding off, everything underneath, all the plywood and all the insulation was black.
Wow.
So we had to redo that. We had to redo the floors. We redid most of the rooms. And every time we would do work and bring the inspector back, he would do this ERMI sampling, and it would gradually get better. So from May of 2020 till about the summer of 21, I was displaced again, but I wasn't having symptoms because I wasn't by the house. So when I would come back to the house, the symptoms would start again. Finally, when I got to a point where that ERMI score was in the negatives, I was able to stay here and, feel normal again. And that was the big thing, because at this point, this had all started in April of 2018, and now we're into 2021. I was starting to wonder if I would ever have a normal life again. I was, at that 3.5 year period, I never stayed in my house for more than a couple of months without having to leave. I was always on the run. So it was kind of like being homeless but owning a home. It was really was taking a toll on me. But luckily, I had the resources. I had to get help to do everything. Luckily, the insurance covered some of it. Well, I was able to cover some of it. My mother was helping me out a bit. So we got everything done. And the last inspection that we had, the ERMI score was -2. All the air sampling was good. And now I'm happy to say I've been in this house since August of 2021, over 6 months now, for the most part, symptom-free, living a normal life. If I never knew about mold or mold testing, I don't know what would have happened to me in that first house. It's a very scary thought. But luckily, the technology was there, the science is there, and we got through it.
No, that's an amazing story, Michael. Obviously, you kind of going through this journey, you educated yourself and you got knowledgeable and took this into your own hands to handle. Before, when you had that first house, I noticed that you said you sold it, you fixed it and sold it. At that point in time, was it just because of the lack of knowledge at that point, that you didn't think that maybe you can handle it? You didn't have the technology to understand how to handle it? What was it that made you decide to sell that home? And I only ask because I know you said later on that had you known now, you probably would have, not sold the house.
I didn't realize how common mold was. I thought that situation was a 1 in a million situation. Previously to that, I had lived in the house I grew up in and 2 different apartments. I never had a problem. So I didn't realize that it was, the rule as opposed to the exception to the rule, especially when you're going to buy or live in property that's a little bit older.
Yeah, it's true. Mold is a lot more prevalent than we'd like to think, and it's not such a rare occurrence as we're kind of led to believe. So yeah, no, I understand that. Now that you're in this home, about how long did it take you for you to recover?
Well, it's the thing. I never stayed in here a great amount of time until August of last year. I was staying in hotels that I had checked out for me too. So I knew the situation was safe for me. So I can't really give you an accurate answer on that, but all I know is that it took from, I guess, almost about 1.5 years to do all the repairs that we needed to do.
And so you were in hotels, you started recovering kind of while you were undergoing remediation, it sounds like.
Yes.
And it took in that year and a half time period while you were out of the house, how long did it take for you, being away from the house to actually start to feel better?
I mean, feeling better would as far as like the rapid heartbeat, the burning sensation, all that would get better within a couple of days. With the autoimmune condition, with the alopecia, that would take several weeks or months for that to start to grow back. But once I was away from the environment, it was like a switch that would get turned off. The immune system wasn't overactive anymore because it wasn't being confused. But that's something I forgot to mention. I looked up a doctor, a toxicologist in Arizona, Dr. Michael Gray, who has the theory that when you breathe in mold particles, the toxins that you breathe in, if you have like a genetic deficiency in filtering them, it stays in the body as opposed to filtering it, or the body takes a while to process it. So while it's taken that long to process it, it confuses the immune system because it has all these foreign invaders. Therefore, it could cause the immune system to attack itself. Once all that is out of you, the immune system will shut down and go back into normal mode. Well, not shut down, but I'm saying it's not going to be overactive.
In all your research with alopecia, did you come across a lot of links between mold exposure and alopecia?
Not at all, and that kind of brings me to another issue I've had with the alopecia community. I've shared my story elsewhere. There was a gentleman in Scotland named Reese. He had a blog about his alopecia journey, and he would invite other people to share their stories. So I would share my stories, and I didn't want other people to go through the same situation I was going through. I want to help somebody in the same situation if I could. So I would leave a link to my email. If anybody would read that and want to ask me any questions about how I got myself out of that situation, how I recovered, I would do my best to help them. But out of all those people, other than somebody I knew personally, there was someone I went to school with that ended up in the same situation. He had lost all of his hair, one of his eyebrows, and his whole beard. We tested out his house. And his daughter was also having another autoimmune condition called eczema. So we tested out his house, and it had very high counts of penicillin, including Stachybotrys. He moved to one of those newer luxury apartments. Within a year, all the hair in his beard grew back. His eyebrows grew back. He grew back some of his hair, but I guess not enough to really do anything with it because he had been in that previous house for a long time. And his daughter's symptoms went away as well. But anybody that had emailed me that I tried to help, to this day, I've had about maybe 20 people email me that I've conversed with. None of them have taken any of my suggestions. I've even given my personal number for them to call me, and nobody has called me. They believe that if they've managed the stress or changed their diet or they take yoga, that their hair will grow back. And as far as I know at this point, it hasn't worked for any of them.
What's so interesting about this is obviously we know that health is holistic, right? You have to pay attention to the water you're drinking, the food you're eating, getting good exercise, sweating, detoxifying, all of that. And air quality is kind of one of the last things that's always top of mind, right? As a matter of fact, it's typically not even on our list. So it's interesting to see kind of the different ways that our environment impacts people. For example, we have people with Lyme disease typically get impacted with mold exposure. Several autoimmune diseases and conditions. You have MCAS. And so, this is probably one of the few times that I've heard about alopecia linked to this, which I think is going to make this episode very special. But it makes sense, right? Because a lot of autoimmune conditions have these triggers from the environment. And they're typically caused by genetic predispositions, right? So it's very interesting in how important that our environment really is and how seriously we should take it versus how we actually take it now.
I agree.
Let me ask you a question.
Yes.
If you had to make some recommendations for people that are going through similar challenges that you went through, what are some of the top few things that you would recommend to them that, you wish you had known earlier in your journey?
Well, I mean, obviously, I wish I knew how common this was, and that the technology is there to fix it. I believe any house can be remediated. Um, if I knew about all those tests that I knew about now, I would have kept the first house and I would have did everything there that I did here. I would have saved a lot of money and a lot of time. You know, but I would recommend, if you think you might be going through the same thing, I'm not telling you to leave your house and go to a hotel right away. Just get a mold test of your house or your apartment and make sure it's somebody that also does the more advanced testing, like the ERMI test, ERMI. That's what environmental. Do you remember what it stands for?
Yeah, the environmental mold index, relative
Yes.
mold index.
Yes, one of those, because like I said before, just the visual inspection and the air sampling by itself may not be enough. If you have somebody that does all these tests, I really think you will narrow it down and improve the air quality of your house and most likely your symptoms as well.
Yeah. And it's so important too to get the data, right? Because without the data, you're kind of shooting in the dark. You really need to understand what's going on, where it's coming from, how much of it is, so you can prioritize how to invest your funds to make sure that you're, handling the biggest issues. What are some other things that you have learned in the process that would be helpful for someone who maybe is at the start of their journey? You mentioned like air testing, how that alone, kind of wasn't as helpful in certain cases, and so utilizing other technology in conjunction with that would be more appropriate. Is there anything else recommendation wise that you can offer?
Um, when I was briefly a patient of Dr. Gray, the toxicologist. Now, his treatment, he recommended a treatment plan with activated charcoal. Um, like for me at least, just getting away from the environment was good enough. So I can't say for sure if his treatment helped me, because even when I was using it, I was away from the environment. But there was a blood test that he did to, I believe it says if you are sensitive to either mold or if you have a chemical sensitivity. If you get that particular blood test, that might be step one in finding out if this might be your situation as well.
That's awesome. And another thing I would love to highlight is you mentioned earlier about how you hired like one of the big chain mold remediation companies or water damage companies initially, and how that didn't really pan out as you had hoped. What was it about that process that didn't pan out the way you would have liked? And what sort of tale of caution can someone else learn from that?
I would say, I mean, you really have to go over what you would plan on doing. Like they'll try to take shortcuts to try to, I don't know, save you some money. So they might not remove all of the floor, they might not remove the whole kitchen or the whole shower area. But I think if you have a really good inspector that finds a potential problem in a room and he recommends doing the whole entire room as opposed to just one section of it, you really have to go with his recommendation. It's going to cost more, but it's the best way to make your environment healthier.
A good advice. What is the one thing that if I guess you had to only leave people with one piece of advice for someone going through this journey? Maybe it's don't lose hope, or maybe it's do your due diligence before you start on this journey. What would that piece of advice be?
Well, definitely don't lose hope, but you have to think outside of the box. If you go to the basic, family physician or dermatologist, or for whatever reason, not all of them are trained in environmental health or how the environment can affect you. So you have to think outside of the boxes. What else can be causing my symptoms other than what's already, in the textbook medical community? Because think about it. I mean, modern medicine has only really been around for 50 years. I mean, we're learning new things every day. So I really think that there's, in the future that we're going to have more answers for what causes our illnesses.
Totally. Yeah, I totally agree. We also, with government funding, we only allocate about $1 million a year to research on mold and water damaged buildings and the health effects that can come with it. So I think clearly the priority that we have as a society, the demand that we're creating as this need is lower than where it should be. Putting pressure by being more aware of how our environment can impact our health, put more pressure on the government to, allocate more funds to it and help get us the answers that we desperately need. So I think that, I've been doing this for about 10 years. So I see things definitely headed in the right direction today, as opposed to when I first started. But we still have room to grow. And I think the medical community will catch on too, as more of this information becomes available, because obviously then they'll need to be creating more widely accepted treatment programs.
I agree.
Well, Michael, I really appreciate your time today. I want to thank you so much for taking your time out of your day to come on here and share your story. Any other last words before we end off?
Actually, if you don't mind, there's a couple people I want to thank as well that helped me get through this journey. One I
Sure.
want to thank, actually, I wrote them down. Well, one, I want to thank you because your company did some of the work for me as well. My new house, All American Restoration. I also want to thank Jim Rosa and James Cavello for doing a lot of my work with the kitchen, the siding, the roof. I want to thank Steve Levy for doing all the testing, to just always being a phone call away. I got to thank Alberto Fiardo. He did just about everything in the house. Even if whenever I had a leak or in the ceiling or whatever, he would come by and check it out right away and do the work if he needed to do. I want to thank my mom. And lastly, and most importantly, I want to thank my wife for just being so patient during this whole time, because I wouldn't have got through this if it wasn't for you. So I'm just happy that after these, those 3.5 years of hiccups, we could finally live a normal life now.
As they say, it takes a village, to make it all work. So there's a lot of counterparts, family support, as well as obviously the different pieces of the puzzle and different contractors to make it work. So, thank you for choosing All American in that part of your journey. And I'm just so glad for the positive outcome that you've received. And thank you for sharing your story to help other people in the process. As I said earlier, it's a lot of men don't think it impacts them the way it does women, and it's not true, right? So it really is helpful to kind of hear from you and for you to take your time out of your day to make this happen. So thank you.
Thank you for letting me share this too.
All right, Michael, talk soon.
Take care.